Welcome to America's Commercial Real Estate Show, your source for market intel, forecasts, and strategies. Hello, I'm Michael Bull. Thank you for being with us. This segment is brought to you by my company, Bull Realty. For customized asset and occupancy solutions, reach out to me directly. My email is michael@bullrealty.com. Well, we have a special show for you today. Every year for many years, we've been covering the emerging trends in real estate. This is an incredible report. It's been put out for 43 years. It's led by the leaders of putting this out are ULI and PwC. And they interview like 2,000 commercial real estate folks and economists and analysts and principals. They start doing these interviews in July of 2021 and end it at Labor Day. And then the experts there, which there's many involved, put out this incredible report. We'll put a link to it. What we'd like to do today is kind of go over some of the highlights from the report and think about what it could mean for you as a viewer or a listener. What are some opportunities that might be out there? What are some favorite sectors? What's the future of office, retail, central business district, the impact of work from home, some risk factors impacting real estate, some of the trends, location preferences, technology's impact, and what to expect moving forward. Please welcome my guest. It's Byron Carlock. He's a real estate practice leader with PwC. Byron, it's good to talk to you again.
Thank you, Michael. It's always a pleasure to be on your show. I really appreciate it. Thank you for having me today.
Well, thank you. And this report is pretty massive. It's pretty awesome. It's an excellent read, and I think anybody that's in the commercial real estate industry in any way should check out this. And let's talk about some of the highlights. And there's so much change going on right now. If you looked at the word change, or maybe surprise or upheaval, what is the number one thing that you think people ought to think about when they read this report?
Well, I think this year, 82% of the respondents said the number one issue we should think about in investment and development is the impact of climate change and ESG on our sector. I think for years the industry knew it was an issue, that it was important, but I think this year it really took top of mind status in the report, and so we've spent some time talking about this.
And what trend or there on that aspect, ESG, is there a sector that's most vulnerable?
Well, if you look at the impact of concrete and steel on carbon emissions, the real estate industry comes, I believe, second only to the airline industry in emissions. I find it ironic, though, as you may remember, I grew up in the Trammell Crow organization, and Mr. Crow back in the 70s made us all wear bumper stickers on our cars that said trees are the answer and put trees into our budgets to offset the impact of the steel and concrete that we were pouring on new developments, realizing that we needed to offset that with planting more trees. He was into ESG before ESG was even an issue or even a discussion point. And today, I think there are ways we can be more thoughtful about the way we repurpose real estate before we rebuild. This will play in interestingly to the new infrastructure bill because there will be literally at least $1.2 trillion spent on infrastructure as we begin to reimagine our cities and adding, and we've been talking about this in the report for several years, the importance of green space adding to quality of life. Well, green space also adds to the reduction of carbon emissions. And so I think this is going to be a cycle, Michael, of development and redevelopment as we repurpose existing real estate and consider building some new, but with an eye toward offsetting those carbon emissions.
Sure. I think everyone is concerned about infrastructure. Some people concerned about the cost. Most people concerned about, hey, we really need it. When you look at logistics today, that problem kind of jumps out. What does your report kind of give us as a trend there and an impact, and what might happen?
Well, I think it's still prognostication at this point because when the report was published, obviously the infrastructure bill has not yet passed. It's still being discussed on the Hill in the two tranches of, deferred maintenance infrastructure and capital infrastructure, and then social infrastructure. It's clear, however, that the intent of this next infrastructure bill it's titled Build Back Better. I think the real goal is to improve the cityscapes and quality of life of our cities with greater connectivity, while also repairing and replacing aged and faulty infrastructure that needs attention that's been deferred really across several generations now. There's not been a massive infrastructure bill really since the highway bill in the 50s, and then we've needed to continue to invest in our infrastructure and have frankly underinvested for probably the last 30 years. So roads and bridges and tunnels for sure, water, electricity, protecting the grid and improving connectivity for sure, but then also doing it with an eye toward resilience and sustainability of our cities, addressing the waterfront, addressing air quality, and all of that comes together. And sadly, it's very expensive, but it's also very important.
The fact that there's a bill in the works, is that a boom for real estate, the future of commercial real estate?
Michael, historically, the multiplier on infrastructure expenditure has been 1.2 to 2 times, depending on what it is. You can only, quickly think about when an airport is built or expanded in a city, what happens around it with respect to the logistics industry and the hotel industry. When roads are built or a ring road is done, it basically opens up new terrain for everything from retail to housing. When roads and bridges are improved such that traffic can move more easily, it also gives room for expansion along those travel routes. So yes, the infrastructure expenditures of the past have often been a boon to the real estate industry. This time we are facing a boon at a time where costs are already very high. And so the competition for labor, the competition for concrete and steel, lumber prices have moderated some, but they had really spiked during the pandemic. And the disruption we're continuing to see in the supply chain for component parts ranging from basic raw materials to windows, doors, plumbing fixtures may exacerbate the cost and minimize the multiplier given the current state of affairs. We are beginning to see some improvements to the supply chain. I hope they continue. Knowing our political cycle, this infrastructure bill may not pass as quickly as the administration is hoping it will. So maybe that'll give some time for the supply chain to level out before we experience a further spike in costs. But we do have a labor issue we've got to address as we see the private sector competing with public sector expenditure.
And you mentioned climate change. Let's touch on that for a moment. What are some opportunities and risk related to that?
Well, you're watching the industrial sector respond very interestingly with, planting more trees around industrial warehouses, putting solar systems on industrial rooftops. We're looking at building design and platinum LEED certification that looks at every component part of the building's materials, from windows, lighting systems, plumbing systems, HVAC controls, so that the temperature control is relevant to the capacity of any floor at any time. And I think our systems and our technology are getting better and smarter. In the office sector, 80% of our stock was built during or before the 1980s. So there's a huge retrofit opportunity for existing stock. Some of it will be too expensive to retrofit, and the buildings will be repurposed to other uses or even demolished. Just like we saw in the retail sector going into the pandemic has only accelerated the transformation of retail, where underutilized retail is being repurposed or demolished. So I think it's the circle of life, if you will. We're facing the need to upgrade the systems and quality of our stock across many sectors, but you look at the impact on office and retail as the most demonstrable, and you see the growth in industrial really trying to be creative in the way they offset carbon use in their construction and rooftop usage.
So is the opportunity there on climate change, to the ability to attract tenants and have the economies of this technology, and is the risk of just not doing it, ignoring it, and losing tenants and losing value? Is that the risk?
Many constituents in the value chain of real estate are demanding ESG compliance. Number one, on the investor side, in order to invest, it's already a mandate from European investors that their investments in real estate be in some level of compliance with ESG standards, and they have to report that back to their stakeholders, especially if it's a European pension fund. There is voluntary compliance for ESG reporting being proposed by the FASB, the SEC, and the PCAOB, such that discussion of your climate policy is part of your financial statement disclosure, and that will only become a higher topic and maybe even regulated in the future. But then on the tenant side, as you pointed out, many tenants see ESG compliance as table stakes for their decision to sign a lease or not. And it's driven not only by their own desires to be socially responsible, but employees are asking questions around, is this building LEED compliant? Are there ESG considerations in the operations of this building? Is our landlord moving toward a net zero mandate to follow the policies of governments and industry toward 2040, 2050 type of compliance? And so you're seeing everything from attention to construction detail to attention to operating expense detail as we try to move toward net zero.
We're talking with Byron Carlock, real estate practice leader with PwC, about the emerging trends in real estate 2022, and want to hit on some of the kind of the big picture items from these interviews and this report, which is incredible. There'll be a link at our website, creshow.com. What about investor confidence, Byron, in commercial real estate and real estate compared to other alternatives?
Well, so the optimism is higher than it was in 2019 this year. As you look at the graph of sentiment toward the industry in 2022, as we go in there, as we move toward 2022, and it's I think it's because of several things. This is the first recession that we're coming out of since recessions have been tracked that wasn't in some way the fault of the real estate industry with a supply and demand imbalance. We had a supply imbalance going into the pandemic, and it only accelerated during the pandemic. Everything from supply of homes to supply of space, except for in the hospitality, retail, and now office spaces, we are basically undersupplied. And even in office, you could argue we're undersupplied in what I call the Class A plus relevant space that is already proving its resilience with respect to ESG compliance, but also the open floor plates and amenitization that we've seen become more important in office. So the demand is high from the tenant side. The demand is high from the investor side as more and more investors have increased their allocation to real estate. So the historic allocation for real estate has been in the 3 to 7% range, depending on the appetite of the investor. That allocation in portfolios of investors has gone up to really 10 to 14%. And so real estate is now a very important institutional attribute to portfolio allocation considerations. And so there's a lot of capital. So if you think about the industry's mood toward that, I mean, my goodness, high demand, abundant equity, and relatively cheap debt is just a developer and investor's dream for increasing one's allocation to such an attractive hard asset category.
Yeah. Good point. What is the outlook, though, for inflation and potential interest rates moving forward?
So I think we're hearing the Fed talk more about the reality of inflation. The debate really is whether it's short-term or long-term. I think that we are seeing it spiked a bit right now because of the increase of Fed stimulus that took place during the pandemic. There's a lot of cash out there. The U.S. savings rate increased from, I think, 8.4% to over 13% during the pandemic. And so there's a lot of cash chasing goods, and that's remember from our Economics 101 class, too much cash chasing too few goods creates inflation. The question is whether or not it's short-term or long-term. personally, I'm of the theory it's relatively short term as we see the supply chain level out and as people begin spending more money on consumables that they deferred during the pandemic, as autos become available again after the supply chain shortages in the automobile and appliance sector. And travel and leisure, people will begin spending and traveling again. I think it's expected that holiday travel will be quite a peak, as well as next summer's travel planning, assuming we don't have a pandemic 3.0, which looks like it's going to be under control.
Yeah. And you mentioned a lot of money in the environment, and some of it from incentives from the government and kind of pent-up demand. Let's talk about housing, single-family homes for a moment. What is the outlook there according to your report and your interviews?
I think most of the statisticians still believe we are 6 to 7 million units short in the housing space, and we've still got a lot of millennials and Gen Zs living at home, deferring their own home formation. So I think the single-family for sale, the single-family for rent, the multifamily for sale, and the multifamily for rent developers have a very attractive run of maybe 5 to 7 years.
Nice. So no bubble there.
Well, the bubble is in the availability of land. I think the real trick right now is to look at underutilized land parcels in and around the urban center that can be repurposed for housing and really neighborhood formation, as we also take a stand toward neighborhood inclusion, tearing down some of the racial and diversity and inclusion constraints that have inhibited neighborhood growth in some close-in suburbs, and open up our cities for development without so many constraints. There's a group called Up for Growth that is trying to educate municipalities on new ways of thinking about density and neighborhood formation that really begins to change some rules that have been in place since the 40s and 50s. And you look at cities that have adopted what I call the 3 or 4 for 1 strategy, where you can tear down one single-family home and put in 4 townhomes, or mix density with single-family for more diverse neighborhood formations. And that's got some very attractive use, because in some markets today, Michael, it takes 8 to 12 years to get zoning approval for certain projects. And those just don't underwrite well because the costs go up. The affordability issues are only exacerbated. We need inventory, and we need to make it easier for land use to be adapted to appropriate housing developments.
Amen, brother. Amen. And let's talk about cities, central business districts. You know, what is the outlook there according to Emerging Trends in Real Estate 2022?
Well, I think that's a great thought, and it's probably a longer conversation. But I think that the pandemic has created a worker demand for flexibility to continue this ability to work from home when they desire and go into the office. And so the central business district will remain important. This is not an either or consideration. It's a both and consideration. And the both and means visitation to the office space is going to be a special visitation. It's going to be something where when you go, you're there for collaboration and brainstorming and discussion, mentoring, product introduction, training. But when it comes to the heads down work, it's okay to do that at home.
Right, if you can get the productivity. When you interviewed people who do lead companies, CFOs, CEOs, not the interviews of employees, but the interviews of the bean counters, you know, what are they saying about the future of office use and this work from home?
I think productivity and associate satisfaction in our firm has actually been up. But where people are hungry for interaction relates to the opportunities to do business planning, team building, education, collaboration, strategic discussion, whiteboarding. And so I think the office is going to be very important, but its use may change such that it's okay to get your heads down productive work done remotely. But when you come into the office, it's going to be for those special opportunities for interaction. We hired 8,000 people during the pandemic at PwC. Many of them are just now beginning to meet colleagues on their teams in person because they've only interacted with them virtually. I think the mental health issues of depriving associates of personal interaction takes a longer term toll, and we've got to catch it before it becomes a problem. That's why I think this is an either or opportunity. It's a both and opportunity, not an either or opportunity.
Yeah, and it seems like there's diverging views when I talk to folks, and it seems like it's kind of ever changing as well. What did your respondents tell you?
So it's interesting. We did some CFO pulse surveys before we did the Emerging Trends survey, and during the pandemic, 82% of CFOs were saying we're going to use this as an opportunity to reduce our real estate footprint. That was in April of 2020. By January 1st, 2021, as we were beginning to make plans to come out of the pandemic, 51% of those same CFOs said, oops, we probably need to expand our footprint. And we need to look at things like hub and spoke real estate, where we have a central headquarters, but we have spoke offices that are easy for people to get to. We need to think about undensifying space that we have perhaps over-densified. And so I think that's why you see so many office users today rethinking the way they use the office, redesigning it, and the architects are having a field day helping people rethink and redesign the workplace.
Yeah, and I think it's about time. I think we were cramming too many people in too little space, and the space wasn't healthy enough.
Agreed. And you bring up a good point about health. I think back to the ESG point, air quality in the buildings is also becoming very important as higher level filtration systems really add to the safety of occupancy of the space. And we've borrowed a lot of information and technology from the healthcare and hospitality industries to make our workplaces safer and cleaner.
Yeah, and we needed to do that. We're talking to Byron Carlock about the Emerging Trends in Real Estate 2022. And one of the things, Byron, you touched on earlier was retail. And certainly retail has seemed to be booming in a lot of places, but then you look at some of the central business districts where a lot of these high-rises aren't as fully occupied as they should be, and there's some retail struggling. What do your respondents say? What does the report say about retail?
Well, retail is an important part of our lives, but it comes in two different dimensions. One is the convenience of e-commerce that we continue seeing growing exponentially. I mean, if not, probably 20 to 25% a year, and it really spiked during the pandemic. But we still crave that interaction with the merchandise and the buying experience. And so you see the retail industry reacting by spending more time making visitation to a store experiential, valuable, educational, and an opportunity to have a direct connection with the retailer of your choice. When it comes to special event clothing, you still want to go try it on. You're not going to buy a tuxedo or an evening gown very often just through the mail. When it comes to electronics, you're happy to go to a showroom to see what's available and then consider buying it online, but you still want to see how it works. You want to see the new pixel technology in the televisions. You want to see the various ranges of earbuds. And so retailers are figuring out how to make store visitation very special while choosing to sometimes shrink footprint on redundant real estate, but with a careful analysis using data and the improved data analytics that we have to determine where their stores ought to be in relation to where their customers and prospects are. And so you're seeing the intersection of data, technology, store location, store delivery, store experience become much more sophisticated.
Well, Byron, you may get your evening gowns in person, but I prefer to order mine online. So the future of retail. So retail's not dead. In-person
Retail
bricks and mortar.
Retail is not dead, but it's going through a major transformation. And so the way we interact with retail is changing dramatically. One thing that's held its own very, very impressively during the downturn has been neighborhood service retail. And the need for grocery-anchored retail stores near concentrations of population, whether you order online, pick up, or have it delivered, you still want a store nearby that you can count on with better food, fresher vegetables, and that relationship with the vendor has actually tightened. And so I think the real question is what happens to B&C malls, and that transformation had already started before the pandemic, but it has accelerated during, and now you're seeing developers look at those large parcels with lots of parking lots as great opportunities for development and redevelopment.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good property, right? It's good real estate.
Most of it, Michael, was always very well located.
Right.
And some of the demise of those properties came from, very difficult lease considerations from the anchors, from leases that were written sometimes, literally back in the 50s and 60s. And if those retailers went out, it gave other tenants the opportunity to also leave. And so there was a quick vacancy acceleration. But the real estate was always pretty darn good. And look at those parking ratios of 5 spaces per 1,000 of feet. It gave a big footprint for consideration of redevelopment and turning that big mall inside out and taking a store anchor spot and putting a mid-rise apartment or hotel there, building out those out parcels. There, some of the retail that is being vacated or redeveloped is going to become very fine mixed-use real estate.
Yeah. And of course, multifamily and industrial have been doing well, and they're expected to do well moving forward. Was there anything that kind of stood out to you from the report related to either one of those specialties?
Well, multifamily and industrial for the third year in a row were the top categories for investment. The big accelerant this year in the sentiment was the interest in what we call alternative real estate outside the 4 major food groups of office, industrial, retail, and multifamily. And that is the acceleration of interest in data centers, life sciences, medical office buildings, even self-storage. Those are small pieces of the real estate inventory square footage taken as a whole, but they are important for tracking some interesting trends in society as we rely on data centers for secure transmission, as we rely on very expensive lab space in the life sciences area to improve our health and well-being, and as we look at the transformation of the healthcare delivery system and their need for different types of real estate to deliver healthcare services.
Yeah, we've certainly seen that as well. And on the brokerage side, the demand for all those property types. And let's talk about location preferences. It seems like there's been a good bit of migration. People have been able to kind of work from anywhere. What's the report tell us there?
Well, it told us that the urban exodus was real during the pandemic. We're now watching the boomerang back to cities like New York and D.C., not so much with Chicago and San Francisco. But one thing that has been very clear, Michael, has been the growth of cities in what we call the Smile region, going down the mid-Atlantic through the south, southwest, and up the west coast. And I think that when you see how hard cities like Phoenix, Scottsdale were during the global financial crisis and how quickly they've come back during and post-pandemic, that's testament to that. But there's a bigger theme also around the attractiveness of states that are pro-business with lower taxation. So we have to continue to watch the abilities of New York, Chicago, LA, San Francisco, attuning themselves to that sensitivity to still be business attractive. They may be great lifestyle cities, and I think that's very important. It's very hard to replace the cultural infrastructure of a city like New York or London. But when taxation becomes so high that cities that don't have that become equally attractive, like a Nashville or an Austin, we've seen a big migration. 375 people a day are moving into the DFW Metroplex. And Texas is a very pro-business, welcoming, no state income tax state, just like Tennessee. And those states have become very attractive for migrants.
Yep. We're talking with Byron Carlock about the 2022 emerging trends in real estate. And Byron, one of the things that investors like to look at is kind of the downside risk. What were some of the major risk factors that came out from the report that we should watch out for?
I think the two biggest were talent and construction costs. And so if you remember during the summer, we had seen a literally, threefold spike in the cost of lumber and concrete and steel up. And so the cost of materials and then the availability and cost of labor. Both can be smoothed through supply chain improvements and immigration policy improvements. And so we cannot deny the need for labor. We have a talent shortage in those trades. We need to be more cognizant of training skilled workers in our high schools and community colleges. The wages are terrific, and it's okay not to go to college and choose a trade. And we've got to change that mantra so that it becomes more attractive for cultivating the next generations of talent in those areas. In addition, there's a huge push in the areas of diversity and inclusion to bring more diverse workforce into the real estate industry. And we've got a long way to go, but we are making strides. And I think the first step is the acknowledgement, and this year's sentiment was clearly toward that acknowledgement.
Byron, I could talk to you for for days, especially after you guys have just went through this huge report, Emerging Trends in Real Estate. But we want to end it up here, but I want to leave with this. Where are the opportunities, Byron? What do you see?
I think there is a great opportunity around utilizing underutilized infrastructure in our third and fourth tier cities. So really, post-World War II forward, we began migrating to 6 major cities on the coasts: Boston, New York, D.C., Miami, L.A., San Francisco. The pandemic really allowed people to say, if I don't have to be in those cities, where am I going to go? And many people began going home, if you will, to smaller cities where they were reared. Many of those smaller cities had experienced huge population declines over a 40-year period. And there's an opportunity to look at the infrastructure of underutilized cities and see what can be done to use that infrastructure for the benefit of population needing housing and places to live and work if they're going to be working remotely. In addition, we saw in between those third and fourth tier cities, second and third tier cities experience great growth. And there's a lot to do in those emerging 18-hour cities as they have really worked hard through city leadership to improve their quality of life, improve their education, neighborhoods, green space, culture, healthcare, security. And those are things that are important to us as we choose where we're going to live. If technology enables that choice, there are a lot of attractive places to live that are more affordable than some of the major cities. But yet the cultural and the technology and some of the leadership issues around major change drivers still exist in the major cities. So it's worth watching cities like Raleigh-Durham and Austin and Nashville and Salt Lake City and even Boise, Idaho as emerging cities that have quality of life, technology, education that are that give alternatives to the expense of the major cities. Does that make sense?
It does, certainly, and we certainly see also the crime sometimes in some of these larger cities are pushing some folks away. I know I was I won't mention the city, but one of the major cities you mentioned during the height of COVID, and there were so few people there and so much crime, you felt like you're about to be a victim. I hope as more people get back into their offices and back in these downtowns, some of that gets reversed. But Byron, what would you leave our audience with to think about as a trend to consider moving forward that came out of this Emerging Trends for Real Estate 2022?
Michael, the most heartwarming element of this report to me was that the real estate industry has embraced its role in being change makers for society, building climate-sensitive product, addressing affordable housing, addressing workforce housing, addressing quality of life issues as we build brick-and-mortar structures and make our cities better. I'm reminded once again of a quote Mr. Crow gave us in my first year leasing class, who said, "People think we're in the real estate business, but we're really in the community betterment business." I really felt like that sentiment came through loud and clear in this year's Emerging Trends survey.
You know, and that's great to hear. That I think commercial real estate can continue to be kind of a leading sector of the industries around the world. Byron, sir, thank you for joining us. Great information.
Thank you so much, Michael. Take care.
All right. And if you'd like to know more information, we'll have a link to the Emerging Trends in Real Estate 2022 report at our website. Our website is creshow.com, and just look for the show that's titled Emerging Trends in Real Estate. And hey, please let us know what you think. We appreciate you sharing the show and connecting with us on your favorite social media. So until next week, be sure that you always lead, learn, and laugh, and join us for America's Commercial Real Estate Show. America's Commercial Real Estate Show is brought to you by Buxton. Take leasing, site selection, and due diligence to the next level. Make the right decisions with on-demand mobile data. Visit buxtonco.com. By Bull Realty. For proven commercial real estate asset and occupancy solutions, contact me. My email is michael@bullrealty.com. By Commercial Agent Success. Expert level commercial real estate broker training. Cloud Access 1, up to 21 one-hour videos. Visit commercialagentsuccess.com. Thank you for reviewing, subscribing, and sharing America's Commercial Real Estate Show.